So, one of the important cycles of history we have to understand is the sociological cycle. This cycle's duration is roughly a century and has 4 phases, each lasting anywhere between 20 to 25 years.
Yeah, understanding this cycle brings clarity to our current cultural moment, and suddenly this season starts to make a lot of sense.
Absolutely. So, the two names you really need to know regarding this cycle are William Strauss and Neil Howe. These two historians were enormously influential and are responsible for coining the term millennial. Now, this is the generation which I'm definitely a part of, and I know it's one you claim to be a part of.
Now listen here, you young whippersnapper. I'm actually the firstborn of the millennial generation, so show some respect. But you're right. Strauss and Howe really left their mark, both on sociology and popular culture, even shaping how many influential politicians on both sides of the political aisle view the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And they really laid the groundwork for their theory back in 1991 with the book Generations. And they studied over 500 years of history, or roughly 5 cycles, noting the 4 distinct phases in each and their repeating pattern. This was followed up 6 years later with an even more groundbreaking book, The Fourth Turning, which not only fleshed out the 4 phases in this cycle, but also made some pretty astounding predictions decades before they actually happened.
Yeah, science is only as good as its predictive ability, and the fourth turning has turned out to be eerily accurate. But before we get into that, we should probably establish what the sociological cycle is and how it works. It starts with the ancient Roman concept of the SAECULum, the idea that time could be measured in generations or the average human lifespan. Like the biblical authors, the Romans and many other ancient cultures understood the impact generations had both on society and on history.
Yeah, and this concept is actually so important and so profound. It was actually how God established his identity to Moses as he established Israel as a nation. He told Moses at the burning bush that he was to be known as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a multi-generational and therefore consistent God. Because the problem has always been the loss of history, tradition, or experience between each generation. And therefore, the radical shifts in beliefs, behavior, culture, and society which take place as a result.
Yeah, Solomon touched on this dilemma in Ecclesiastes when he lamented that generations come and generations go, and that no one remembers the former generations. Joshua understood this generational loss of memory well, so he erected stones after crossing the Jordan to ensure that future generations would remember God's faithfulness in Israel's history that day.
Yeah. Absolutely, really good. So, generational theory studies the interplay between generations, culture, and society, identifying 4 generational archetypes and their corresponding 4 societal phases, or turnings. Strauss and Howe named the archetypes the prophet, the nomad, the hero, and artist generations, each of which were born in the corresponding societal phases, or turnings they called the high, the awakening, the unraveling, and the crisis. These 20 to 25 year phases, together they complete a SAECULum, or one sociological cycle.
Yeah, and to break that down, prophets, categorized as an idealist and visionary generation, are born in the societal high, marked by strong institutions and cultural values. Nomads, categorized as a reactionary and restless generation, are born during the societal awakening, marked by social and spiritual revolt. Heroes, categorized as civic-minded yet entitled and self-absorbed, are born in the societal unraveling, which is marked by weak institutions and cultural values. And then finally, artists, which are categorized as an adaptive generation, are born in the societal crisis, marked by the dismantling and rebuilding of institutions.
Yeah, and then to put all that into context, America's last societal high began in 1946, at the end of World War II. Our last awakening began in 1964, kicked off by the civil rights and hippie movements. We entered the unraveling in 1984 with crime rates skyrocketing, and entered our crisis in 2008 with a financial crash. History tells us these turnings last 20 to 25 years, so we should definitely be expecting our crisis season to escalate well into the late 2020s or even the early 2030s.
Yeah, and to put that into perspective, it's important to note that the last societal crisis we faced, began with the stock market crash of 1929, and then it culminated in World War II.
Yeah.
A pattern that is eerily similar to the events unfolding in this crisis phase and hints at what's to come.
Yeah, due to two other cycles which are completing the season. But before we get to those, let's go back to some of the predictions that Strauss and Howe made nearly 25 years ago pertaining to what we'd likely experience as a nation during this upcoming crisis. Because long before Game of Thrones popularized the phrase, Strauss and Howe were writing, "History is seasonal and winter is coming."
Yeah, and they might have been a bit too conservative in their warning, but using history as a guide to the future, they predicted the crisis would begin with a financial crisis around 2005.
Yeah.
It hit in 2008. They also predicted terrorists would utilize airplanes, ushering in a war on terror in the Middle East, that Iran would ally with Russia, and that the U.S. federal government would face shutdowns due to stalemates over the budget, even suggesting a new Tea Party could emerge.
Wow. But probably the most shocking prediction, get this, was that the CDC would announce the spread of a new communicable virus with the federal government enacting mandatory quarantine measures while local governments resisted. And if that wasn't enough, they also predicted civil violence and insurrection, which could include questions of race and class.
Yeah. Of course, the big question is, will America survive this crisis?
Yeah.
Start a new sociological cycle and enter into another societal high as it did coming out of World War II? Or will she succumb to entropy and collapse?
Yeah.
Furthermore, as you mentioned earlier, we're hitting the end of this sociological cycle at the same time as at the end of a few other cycles. This unfortunate alignment further explains why we are experiencing such great upheaval in this season. A season which isn't over yet and is going to get much, much worse.
Hey, I'm Josh.
And I'm Joshua.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this third installment, Understanding Generational and Societal Cycles in History.
And join us in the next segment as we dive into the institutional and socioeconomic cycles, which will make the 2020s an extraordinarily turbulent decade.